Like all the other message boards are saying, here comes Bama.
You are Locked On Bama, your daily podcast on the Alabama Crimson Tide, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody, welcome back into Locked On Bama. Luke Robinson, that's me from the AHSA Radio Network, and Jimmy Stein from Bama Online, that's him. And we want to thank you for making this your first listen every single day. This episode is brought to you by Gametime, and we especially thank you every dayers. Y'all are the best, but we also like the new guys, so come on in. Jimmy, Alabama recruiting after the big commitment from Ty Haywood, which we talked about yesterday, has moved up to the number one class, at least on some services, and I'll take it. And, it's somewhat of a surprise. I think this is, everybody's been a little shocked nationally by how well Kalen DeBoer is recruited. But I think taking this spot at this time has really opened eyes like, oh my God, they're not really going anywhere.
It's hard to imagine with this level of recruiting not being successful on the field down the road. It has felt like a continuation of Nick Saban's recruiting success in so many ways. I had higher expectations than most when Kalen DeBoer was hired and put together that staff and Courtney Morgan heading the recruiting effort. I felt really good about Alabama continuing to recruit well because of everything that was in place to recruit well. But my idea of Kalen DeBoer recruiting well meant, well, I'm confident they could put together a top 10 group. And frankly, I really wanted to say, I bet they still recruit top 5-ish. I bet. But I didn't expect number one, particularly in a cycle where someone like an Ohio State, who traditionally recruits really well, has sort of put the accelerator to the floor as it relates to NIL. And Ohio State is bound and determined to whip everybody in recruiting, and Alabama is still number one ahead of them. I didn't expect that level of recruiting, so I'm as surprised as everyone else, Luke, even though I felt it would probably be better than what most thought, because Nick Saban had sort of, to use the Saban, automobile terms, Nick had sort of built a Ferrari here, and all Kalen DeBoer had to do was drive it and keep it between the lines. I just didn't expect him to drive that Ferrari and win the Indy 500.
No, I'm right there with you. It's almost like we thought he was just going to be the sausage king of Chicago and drive his dad's car to
Abe Froman
to the fancy restaurant. Turns out Kalen DeBoer was the valet running down the streets going 100 miles an hour with his hair in the wind. Very little hair, but that's okay. Recruiting will make you.
Was that a Corvette? What was
I don't even know what it was. Jimmy, I hadn't seen that movie in so long, but Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
I hadn't either, but I did somehow remember Abe Froman, the sausage king of Chicago.
Here's the question: Can it stay there? There's Ty Jackson left on the board. There's A.K. Deere left on the board. There's Derek Meadows, Khalil Lockett left on the board. If you want to say Malachi Goodman, but Malachi Goodman actually, I think, just trimmed his list to 3, and Alabama's not on it because Alabama's pretty full at the offensive line. Maybe another running back should Turbo Rogers decommit and flip to Ohio State like some people think. Maybe. But I don't think there's a lot more spots left. Now, it's quality over quantity at this point, but I think it's going to be relatively difficult to stay at number one because I feel like Ohio State's got a few more tricks in its bag and bags in its tricks. That would be horrible. But I feel like it's got some more, aces in the hole to pull. And when they do that, and assuming they hold on to Naheem Alford and things like that, then I feel like it's going to be very difficult to beat Ohio State for that number one spot. But regardless, if you're an Alabama fan, 1 or 2 this year, you've got to be over the moon with the way things are going. And you got to feel like, hey, there's no reason this can't be maintained.
Yeah, I think holding on to number one is going to be tough. We do expect, as we've predicted at BOL, I predict A.K. Deere will at some point choose Alabama, and that's going to just cement Alabama in that number one spot, adding a player as highly ranked as A.K. Deere is. But then from that point, Luke, I'm not saying Alabama won't add. I think they will add actually from there. A couple of kids somehow will be added. But I think in terms of the super heavy hitters, that might be almost done, So the question is, once you add AK Deer, is that enough to hold on to number one all the way to December if you hold on to all you got, which, by the way, is going to be difficult in this NIL landscape where all of a sudden other teams get a little desperate. When they get desperate, they can add zeros to checks. I mean, and that's legal these days. So holding on to this group is going to be fraught. Those with high anxiety may not enjoy that holding on process, because who knows, there could be late visits and things like that. So adding AK Deer, holding on to what you got, is that enough for number one? Maybe so.
It'll be close.
I do have a couple. I don't have names here, but just looking at this group and in terms of, I think what we might, this is a prediction on my part. This isn't a BOL thing. This isn't a scoop thing. This is just a Jimmy out there on a thin limb prediction. I think some new names might emerge during senior seasons, particularly at DB, because I don't think they're going to be done at defensive back. And there's
Really?
not defensive backs out there. Well, right now you only got Derek Smith, Dijon Lee, and Chuck McDonald. That's it.
Okay, you brought up Derek Smith. I saw Cole Pinkston from On 3 had Derek Smith in his mock Auburn class. He assumes a flip. I just don't see that happening. Do you?
I don't see it happening. I don't forecast it happening. I don't predict it happening, but I also don't absolutely rule it out. I mean, obviously, any kid that's going on visits, and I wouldn't be surprised if Derek Smith is at Big Cat Weekend. I think
he's supposed to be.
I think a few Alabama commitments might be at Big Cat Weekend, which is Auburn's big recruiting blowout. The thing to watch for, the only reason I would freak out or be anxious about an Alabama kid going to Big Cat Weekend is if that same Alabama kid did not go to the Alabama Champions Barbecue. If that same kid is going to Big Cat but not Alabama's barbecue, then then it's time to at least be nervous, But Auburn and all these other schools are going to continue to recruit these Alabama kids who will continue to go on other visits if there's going to be fun times and parties and football talk and college girls. I mean, why not go on these trips?
Not necessarily in that order.
No. That just like NIL and other things, you line up the priorities according to personal preference. But But I do think that Alabama. I just don't think Alabama's going to sit at 3 DBs. Now, they can address DB through the transfer portal.
Well, I was thinking because their DB class was so good last year, too, that it feels like going after one more DB may be overkill unless you went in the transfer portal to get somebody that may be like, okay, he's sort of a stopgap.
Yeah, their numbers overall at DB aren't awesome. There may be a couple short of what they would like to have. Some of it depends on, how many of these guys are leaving. Only Malachi Moore is out of eligibility, but you have other draft eligible kids who could leave. I mean, Damani Jackson could have a huge year and go. Keon Sabb could have a huge year and go. Devontae Smith could have a huge year and go. But, if you're only losing Malachi, you probably would like to sign maybe 4, and they have 3. Again, it's just a prediction on my part. I would look for a senior season DB to emerge. That probably a guy we're not talking about. They were interested in Ivan Taylor. He's gone to Michigan, I believe. And they looked at a couple other DBs. There's a couple that are out there. A kid out in Arizona that visited, and Jim Coyley from Jim Coyley from Tennessee is interesting. And then there's even who's going to be floored if something happens with Alabama and Anquan Fagans. I mean, that's something that could happen. But I think the best bet is a senior season type DB that blows up late.
Well, another guy we're hoping will blow up late is Tim Smith. But right now, I need to tell you about eBay Motors. eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber. You're not burning cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home some huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions, yeah, they apply. And eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So Tim Smith, here's a guy that, he recovered a fumble. Was it against Florida in the SEC championship game? Is that right?
He recovered two. I don't have it in front of me, Luke. He recovered two fumbles. You may be. I think both fumbles he recovered were during his true freshman season in 2020.
Yeah, and I think that was the SEC championship game in against Florida. One of them was, at least. I just remember.
I think you might be right. I think you might be right. I think both he's recovered two in his career, and both were during his freshman season. But that's probably one of them right there. He's made some plays.
He's made some plays, but has he made enough plays? And I think the answer to that is clearly no. Relative to his size, relative to what we expected from him, he was a 5/4-star guy coming out of high school. I think we expected a little more, frankly. But I'm thinking now, he's been at Bama a long time, Jimmy. He was there for Alabama's last national championship, which sounds weird to say, but feels like a long time ago. But he's also been a part of some SEC champions, some other SEC. I guess he's got 3 SEC titles, right?
Yeah, he's been here since
2021 and 23.
2021 and 23. 3 SEC titles, 1 national title. He's one of the few guys on the team that has that national championship ring from 2020, and he's still out there. Look, I'm anticipating a jump from Tim Smith. I think I might have said the same thing a year ago, but I really expect it now. He's been good. I think we kind of underrank how good he's been. Obviously, the staff had been pretty happy with him in the sense that each year there's more snaps, there's more starts. I think 7 or 8 or 9 starts, a year ago. So this is a returning starter. He has played significant snaps with the ones his entire career, starting as a true freshman in 2020. But in 20, 21, 22, and 23, this is a guy that's been out there with the first team. He's been a good player. Has he been great? No, not at all. But now I think it's his year. Here's a surprising stat, Luke. This may shock folks out there. Let's go all the way back to 2020, and or it might even be before then, going all the way back to Raekwon Davis. Raekwon Davis left Alabama and was a 2nd-round pick in the NFL draft. Starting with Raekwon Davis, every single year since, Alabama has produced a day 2 pick in the NFL draft. Day 2 is rounds 2 and 3. Again, there hasn't been a first-rounder, but there has been a day 2 pick every year. It was Raekwon, then it was Christian Barmore, then it was Phil Mathis, then it was Byron Young. Last year it was Justin Aboigbe, and I realize Aboigbe didn't go day 2. He was a day 3 pick, but he was one of the first 5 guys taken on day 3. So, he was very borderline day 2. And we all know if Aboigbe had been healthy and didn't have that thick medical jacket, he would have gone a little higher. So I'm going to count him as a day 2 guy for the purposes of this discussion. The point is, Alabama has been very consistent putting a senior or draft-eligible junior defensive lineman in day 2. Tim Smith is that guy this year. I think he's going to follow. I'm predicting he follows the Raekwon Davis, Christian Barmore, Mathis, Young, Aboigbe group, and becomes a day 2 guy because of his play in his final season, which more than justifies his ranking that I have right here, ranking him the 18th best player on the team. Again, a lot of ability, a lot of experience. I love how he came back. He could have been drafted last year. He could have left and he would have been drafted last year. Now, he probably would have been a 6th-round pick or so a year ago, but I appreciate that he's come back and wants more than that. And I think he sees himself as, hey, if I come back and everything falls into place, I can be a day 2 guy. And I'm predicting that happens. But I do admit he hasn't played like a day 2 guy yet. It's going to take a improved Tim Smith for us to be saying here on our November and December shows, hey, I'm projecting Tim Smith to go day 2. We're going to have to see it on the field. But I think all the pieces are in place, and the reports from the new staff are all pretty good.
Correct me if I'm wrong. He could even come back.
No. He's done now.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's one of the few that's well, he has a redshirt year. He's never redshirted.
Oh, okay. So if he redshirted this year, which
redshirted this year, which means if he got hurt within the first 4 games, I mean, if he got hurt within the first 4 games and lost the rest of the year, yeah, he could come back. But boy, that'd be incredible. He'd be like 38 years old.
He would be as old as Ashawn Robinson looks.
That's right.
So, yeah.
That's right. But no, I think he'll be healthy, and I think he'll play great. And again, I'm going to go ahead right here and say no worse than 3rd round as a prediction.
I'm with you. I'm right there with you. I feel like he's going to. I really do believe he's going to have a good year. Now, this is a Bama show, so but I think we've been relatively honest for the most part that if we feel like somebody hadn't shown it and we're like, we're not sure they will, then we say that. But Tim Smith, I just feel like there's too much there for him not to have a breakout. There's just too much there. There's too much good clay that at this point has been molded.
And I think remember this also. Great point. Good. Here's one more point. You talk about his recruiting rankings. They were all over the place. Some had him really high. ESPN had him like in the 140s.
Yeah.
Okay. On3's industry ranking for him, right about 50. Okay. Yeah. And if you're the number 50 player in the draft, where are you going? End of 2nd, early 3rd. So, and that's what we're saying. I'm saying it took him 5 years to get there, but I think he may live up ultimately to that recruiting ranking. But him living up to his recruiting ranking, in terms of the industry ranking, late 2nd, 3rd round pick.
Another guy who we expect big things from that actually played against Alabama last year is Keon Sabb, and he is next on the countdown. I feel like we need to introduce everybody to Keon Sabb here for just a second. He's a transfer from Michigan. He'll be a sophomore, about 6'1", 200. He's from New Jersey. Last year, he didn't set the world on fire, 14 solo tackles, but he did have 2 interceptions. That's, pretty impressive considering he played, I guess, as a freshman last year. He seemed to play in every game. There were some games where he didn't do a lot, but one of the games where he didn't do a lot was at Minnesota. He had, he had an interception, but no tackles. But they won 52-10. If you look at Michigan's record last year, I mean, obviously they went undefeated, but here are their scores last year. So, they win 30-3, 35-7, 31-6, 45-7, 52-10, 52-7, 49-0, 41-13. I mean, they were blowing people out. So I'm guessing that, the wealth was spread around pretty good. I'm not going to pretend that I know everything about Keon Sabb right now, but I'm guessing that, he probably just didn't have the opportunity to play maybe as much as he wanted to, because they're playing a lot of folks when you're beating everybody's brains out. I mean, Alabama's done that before. Nick Saban was a little different though. Nick Saban was like, I'm going to beat your brains out, and then I'm going to go Negan from The Walking Dead with a baseball bat on top of those brains.
Now, Keon Sabb is one of the most interesting players on the team. First of all, for anyone who has expectations, my concern when Keon Sabb came out of the portal from Michigan, signed him with Alabama back in January, it was right on the heels of Alabama losing Caleb Downs to the portal to Ohio State. And my concern was, after learning about Sabb, is that Alabama fans would say, look, Caleb is gone, but we replaced him with Keon Sabb. Apples for apples. Lost a big-time safety, bring in a big-time safety. That is not fair to Keon at all. That has never been. No one's ever in football. He was not the prospect that Caleb was. And he was not the true freshman. I mean, while Caleb was dominating the SEC, leading Alabama in tackles with over 90 as a true freshman, Keon redshirted as a freshman. Keon was lesser of a player in year 2 at Michigan than Caleb was in his year 1 at Alabama. So that's not fair to Keon. He was never brought in as an apples for apples replacement for Caleb. Now, that said, is Keon Sabb, does he have the potential to be a really good safety in the SEC? Absolutely. Absolutely. He's a top 100 player nationally. He's a good kid. He's a hard worker. As Luke just pointed out, on Michigan's national championship team, he was a significant player. Did he start every week? Was he their best player? No. But he started 5 times. He had 2 picks. In the national championship game against Washington, he had a season-high 6 tackles. So he's out there on the field in the most significant game possible for Michigan, making 6 tackles. So Keon was a significant player at Michigan. Was he great? Was he Caleb? Nope. Now, what's he done at Alabama? He arrived in January, and all the reports on Keon are great. As a matter of fact, practice number 1, he was a first-team safety at Alabama. He held on to first-team role throughout the entirety of spring practices, and then on A-Day was a first-team player lined up alongside Malachi Moore at safety. So Keon Sabb and Malachi Moore will be Alabama's starting safety duo. I think they'll be one of the better safety duos in the country. Not the best, but one of the best in this SEC. And I'm excited about Keon. A little different than Malachi. Malachi is more of an in-the-box physical safety. Keon more of a center fielder, more of a cover guy, more of a rangy guy. So together they make a pretty good duo because Malachi's a guy who can play in the box. Keon's a guy who can play back and defend those deep balls and running with receivers. So very excited about Keon Sabb. Just don't compare him to Caleb Downs. That's just not fair to Keon. Caleb's going to be a 3-and-done first-round pick at Ohio State.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. And look, there are some folks who believe that, and they, but let's also not discount the fact that Keon Sabb did win a national championship last year. That is positive. I mean, Caleb Downs went to the semifinals, which also and won an SEC, which means something. But Keon Sabb has been in big moments. Yeah. And I think that is very helpful, and especially this year with this schedule where Alabama's slate is dotted with a lot of big moment potentially. So I feel like getting this guy is very, very important. I'm totally in agreement with where you have him on the countdown, especially if you're considering like how important each person will be for this slot. Like, I don't think it's necessarily that he's the 16th best player on the roster, but I think he might be the 16th most important. I mean, he's obviously not going to be Jalen Milroe. He's obviously not going to be Justice Haynes. But I think that somebody like that, or maybe Caden Proctor, something like that. But I think that he's going to be very important, and he's going to have a bit of a learning curve. The SEC is different than the Big Ten. I mean, that sounds so like rudimentary, but it's true. And there's actually more passing and much better competition. I mentioned
he'll face better receivers every week. Now, it's not like the Big Ten doesn't have good receivers. I mean, for goodness sake, Marvin Harrison Jr.
But they're all in one place.
All of those Ohio State receivers, and even Penn State's got dudes, and Michigan State's going to have the occasional Keon Coleman who they had as a young player, but not like the SEC. In the SEC, you're facing
Luther Burden,
potentially a first-round receiver. Every week you play a conference game, you're playing somebody. The other team's best receiver is very possibly or probably a first-round pick, and that's who you're facing every week, as opposed to the Big Ten, where some weeks you face those guys, and you certainly do with Ohio State, which needless to say, has an SEC-type roster.
Dare I say, he may be facing better wide receivers at Alabama's practice than he did for the most part in the Big Ten.
Well, yeah, when you play Indiana, Minnesota, Northwestern, Iowa, even Wisconsin,
ECU,
Purdue, you're Rutgers, Maryland. You're not talking about premium receivers at those places, but the SEC, there's hardly a week that you don't. I mean, everybody in the SEC is going to have at least one guy that's going to be very difficult to cover. So I think Keon's going to be fine, as you said, Luke. I wouldn't sit here and tell anybody that Keon Sabb is the 16th best player on this team, but considering the size of the role he's going to play, I think he's the 16th most important player for sure. And he's a guy that's going to be out there every single snap. He will be, when Alabama's defense is on the field and the game is undecided, Keon Sabb will be on the field, and he'll be a big part of Alabama's success. This new scheme under Kane Womack really highlights safeties. I've been told that by multiple people close to Kane, that safeties are a big part of things with him. Everything's sort of funneled to safeties. They need to be dependable tacklers, and I think Keon's one of those guys.
Yeah, now SEC Media Days get started today. LSU and Ole Miss are probably the two highlights, and that's wonderful. We will probably be talking a little bit about reaction from things that Lane Kiffin says, maybe some stuff Brian Kelly says. And so it's going to be a lot of fun this week, and it's going to be a busy week. I mean, 4 days.
Already been a Saban story.
What?
Saban was denied. It's already been a Saban story. He was denied entry at the media days because he didn't have credentials or a lanyard. Saban's not used to just being one of the media crew, right? He's used to being the head coach at Alabama. He didn't know or wasn't told that he needed media credentials or a lanyard to enter the media entrance. So he was held up until probably the president of ESPN was alerted that Nick Saban was mad. And then
they fired everybody.
They took care of that.
Yeah.
But it is kind of funny, like Nick Saban, not with the coaches, with the media. And hey, one thing I didn't expect this morning on SEC Network, when the SEC Media Days coverage began, minute number 1, Nick Saban was front and center with Laura Rutledge and Benjamin Watson.
They'd be fools not to do it. They'd be fools not to do it.
He's going to be interviewing Brian Kelly shortly. That's going to be another fun thing to watch. Nick Saban doing the question asking instead of the question answering.
And Brian Kelly can maybe ask something back like, hey, have you did your guys ever pull all the Notre Dame players out of their cleats from the 2012 game? All right, that's going to do it for this episode. We'll be back tomorrow with more. Until then, roll tide, everybody.
Roll Tide.